Imagine Victorian England in the grip of the Industrial Revolution, new machines, crowded cities, and social change everywhere. In this restless age, Matthew Arnold emerged as both a poet and a critic, searching for stability in culture, literature, and religion. Born in 1822, the son of the famous schoolmaster Thomas Arnold of Rugby, Matthew was educated at Oxford and later became a school inspector. This career gave him a close-up view of modern society's problems, inequality, industrial chaos, and moral uncertainty. In 1857, he was appointed professor of poetry at Oxford, and here's a fun fact: he was the first to deliver his lectures in English instead of Latin, opening the door for wider audiences. As a poet, Arnold's voice is full of skepticism and melancholy, but as a critic, he was sharp, uncompromising, and deeply moral. Pause here and note this: it was asked in exam. In a letter from 1853 to Arthur Hugh Clough, Arnold called Charlotte Bronte's Villette a hideous, undelightful, convulsed, constricted novel, and described Bronte herself as full of hunger, rebellion, and rage. That biting remark has become famous in discussions of her work. Now, let's turn to his critical writings. On translating Homer from 1861, Arnold defended the greatness of classical poetics. In Essays in Criticism, first series 1865, he gave us the function of criticism at the present time, where he defined criticism as a disinterested endeavor to learn and propagate the best that is known and thought in the world. After his death, Essays in Criticism, second series 1888, included the study of poetry, where he described poetry as a criticism of life and introduced his famous touchstone method evaluating poems by comparing them with the finest lines of the great masters. Arnold's influence wasn't limited to literature. In Culture and Anarchy, 1869, he defined culture as the study of perfection, warning against the social fragmentation of Victorian life. In Literature and Dogma, 1873, he argued for a liberal reading of Christianity as unconscious poetry. And in Discourses in America, 1885, thus not bolus and informant or, he even reflected on the promise of American thinkers like Emerson. In 1880, Matthew Arnold gave a famous answer in his essay, The Study of Poetry. He declared that poetry has a high destiny. Poetry, he argued, will interpret life for us, console us, and sustain us. Pause here, this exact line has been asked in exam. For Arnold, poetry is not a pastime or decoration. It carries moral and spiritual force. And the mark of true greatness in poetry is what he calls high seriousness, asked in exam. Think of Milton, serious in theme, truthful in spirit, noble in style. Poetry for Arnold is a criticism of life, not in the sense of complaint, but as a moral illumination of human experience. This way, he turns Plato's old attack upside down: poets do not corrupt. They preserve civilization's highest insights in beautiful form. But how do we judge greatness? Arnold warns us against two traps: the personal estimate, praising a poet too highly because we love them, and the historical estimate, valuing works only because they are old or important in context. Both, he says, are unreliable. Instead, he proposes the famous touchstone method asked in exam. This method borrows from Longinus. We keep in mind short, striking passages from the greatest poets: Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, Milton. By comparing other poetry against these touchstones, we can feel whether that same high poetic quality is present or absent. Now let's look at how Arnold applies this. Chaucer, he says, is delightful and indispensable to English tradition, but he falls short of classic status because he lacks high seriousness. Robert Burns is brilliant in Scottish verse, but weaker in English. Thomas Gray, though he wrote little, reached the classic standard in poems like Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. And when he turns to Byron, Shelley, and Wordsworth closer to his own century, he treads carefully, reminding us that personal bias is dangerous, Pause here and note this down. The essay's lasting message is that poetry is the supreme cultural inheritance of humanity. Only works that combine truth, sincerity, and seriousness in subject and style deserve to be preserved as part of civilization's intellectual treasury. So, remember these anchors for Arnold: high seriousness, criticism of life, touchstone method, and his caution against personal and historical estimates. All of them have been asked in exam, making this essay one of the most important pieces of 19th century criticism. Picture the year 1865. Matthew Arnold publishes his famous essay, The Function of Criticism at the Present Time. At first glance, it seems like a defense of critics, but it's much more. It's Arnold laying out his vision of culture, creativity, and the critic's true task. Arnold begins by distinguishing between two powers, the creative and the critical. He tells us that literature of lasting greatness doesn't come from genius alone, but from genius meeting the right moment. Can you recall his examples? Goethe, in Germany, flourished because of a rich climate of ideas, while Byron, though equally gifted, lacked that cultural atmosphere. Even Shakespeare's genius, Arnold reminds us, was shaped by the vibrant intellectual energy of the Renaissance. He compares revolutions too. The French Revolution, enriched by thinkers like Rousseau and Voltaire, produced a deeper current of ideas than the English Revolution. For Arnold, cultural vitality moves in cycles, with epochs of concentration followed by epochs of expansion, both shaping conditions for art. But the heart of the essay is criticism itself. Pause here and note this down. Arnold defines the essence of criticism as disinterestedness, asked in exam. By this, he means the critic must detach from political, religious, or personal bias and instead see the object as in itself it really is. No distortion, no partisanship, just truth. And what is the critic's duty? Arnold gives us three clear functions. First, to cultivate a broad and truthful understanding of life. Second, to communicate the best that is known and taught to society, asked in exam. And third, to create an intellectual climate where future genius can thrive. Creative writers may get the glory, but critics prepare the ground. They refine ideas, build an atmosphere of seriousness, and keep culture alive. So, while Arnold admits that creative activity is the true function of man, he insists that criticism is not secondary. It is essential. Without criticism, genius stands alone. With it, culture grows, deepens, and sustains itself. That's why the function of criticism remains a cornerstone in Victorian criticism and a favorite in exams. Let's step back into the Victorian world with Matthew Arnold's Culture and Anarchy, first published in 1869. This essay, serialized originally in Cornhill magazine and later expanded with a preface, remains one of the cornerstones of Victorian cultural criticism. Arnold saw a society torn apart by divisions, turbulence, and political disorder, and he believed culture could be the remedy. Pause here and note this down. Arnold famously defined culture as a study of perfection, meaning the effort to know, apply, and pursue what is best, asked in exam. His most quoted phrase, "Culture is the best which has been thought and said in the world," asked in exam, captures his belief that culture is not just personal refinement, but a universal force. He wanted culture to circulate everywhere, making people live in an atmosphere of sweetness and light. Can you recall what sweetness and light meant for Arnold? It symbolized the balance of beauty and reason, uniting moral vision with intellectual clarity. His hope was that culture could lift individuals above class conflict and guide society with harmony and enlightenment. His line, "He who works for sweetness and light united," asked in exam, reflects this dream of an enlightened and morally balanced society. Now here's where Arnold makes it memorable. In Culture and Anarchy, he sets up the contrast between Hebraism and Hellenism. He's an exam. Hebraism represents moral discipline, obedience, and strict duty. Hellenism on the other hand, stands for beauty, reason, and the freedom to think. Both forces are essential, Arnold says, but Victorian society had become too rigidly Hebraic and therefore needed the corrective touch of Hellenism. Arnold also introduced striking cultural labels. The barbarians were the aristocracy, guided by honor but resistant to progress. The Philistines were the middle classes, practical and materialistic but lacking vision. And the populace referred to the working classes, often unruly and resistant to refinement. These categories, satirical as they were, became part of the Victorian lexicon and shaped cultural debate. And here's something to underline. Arnold later extended his critique in Friendship's Garland from 1871 Aston Exam, a witty satirical sequel. But it was culture and anarchy that cemented his legacy, presenting culture not as a luxury but as a guiding moral and spiritual force, one that could unify Victorian intellectual life